2001. The president has asked for tolerance.
Muslims are doctors, lawyers, members of the military, entrepreneurs, shopkeepers, moms and dads, and they need to be treated with respect.
Law enforcement has promised diligence.
We do not, have not, will not target people based solely on their ethnicity, period.
But for hundreds, the reality is different.
I always thought they were the good guys. And when they came into my home and acted in the manner that they did, I felt raped.
Tonight, is ethnic profiling ever part of good policing as America fights back?
From ABC News, this is Nightline. Substituting for Ted Koppel and reporting from Washington, Chris Bury.
Imagine three men walking into an airport, all with dark complexions, all wearing turbans and untrimmed beards. Should they be subject to more intense questioning and thorough searches than the next passenger? If your answer is yes, consider this. The men are more likely to be Sikhs from India than Muslim fundamentalists from the Middle East. Unlike Islam, the Sikh religion requires men to wear turbans and beards. That raises one concern with profiling as a tool of airport security or law enforcement. It's inherently clumsy. Yes, it's true that all 19 hijackers were Arab Muslims, but nearly 3 million Arabs reside in the United States, and it's just as true that the vast majority are law-abiding. Yet is it always prejudice to single out ethnic groups in the larger interest of public safety? Or is it simple prudence at a time like this? We'll take up those questions, but first, the latest headlines. The White House indicates that Reagan National Airport here in Washington will reopen with armed sky marshals on all flights. The president of Pakistan warns Taliban leaders in Afghanistan that their days are numbered and that an American attack is inevitable. In Congress, key leaders agreed to expand federal wiretap powers, but dropped a controversial proposal permitting the indefinite detention of foreign suspects. More than 500 people have already been detained in the investigation, most of them Muslims and Arabs who haven't been charged. Is that justified, or is it an abuse of police power? Here's ABC News correspondent Dan Harris.
Many Muslims and Arabs say given the scope and urgency of this investigation, they're willing to give law enforcement a certain amount of leeway.
There has been a crisis, there's been a state of emergency, and I think our community understands that there has to be some measure of patience here. There has to be some forbearance.
But there are times, they say, when their patience has been sorely tested. One of their central complaints, that the government is making unprecedented and unfair use of its powers to arrest and detain people. Sam Awadallah is one of 4 young Muslim men recently arrested in San Diego as what's called a material witness. He isn't charged with a crime. Investigators simply think he might have useful information. They can hold a material witness against his will by convincing a judge that the witness might be a flight risk. This is not a new tactic, but it's never been used on the current scale.
I have to ask myself, are the principles on which this country is founded being adhered to in this particular scenario? And I submit to you that they're not.
Randall Hamoud is Awadallah's attorney.
Every Arab American, and Muslim now is supposedly a fellow traveler of terrorists and terrorism. It's appalling, it's undemocratic, it's discriminatory, and it's the most disappointing period I have ever experienced myself as an Arab American in the country.
More than 500 people, many of them Muslims or Arabs, have been detained. A handful as material witnesses, others on unrelated criminal charges or immigration violations. Not one of these people has been charged with a crime directly related to the September 11th terror attacks. Many in the law enforcement community say extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures.
You want to make sure that you do everything possible to preserve the national security of the United States. There have even been some suggestions that this is an invasion as contemplated by Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution, which permits the suspension of the right of habeas corpus. I'm not necessarily sure that's true, but it clearly indicates the severity of the situation we're facing.
While hundreds of Arabs and Muslims have been rounded up, hundreds more have been questioned. And some of them say law enforcement officials are conducting this operation in indiscriminate and inappropriate ways. There have been reports that FBI agents have tried to interrupt prayers at mosques to question worshipers and come to Muslim homes interrogating and intimidating innocent people. Ali Arakanolu, an American-born electrician, says agents came to his home in New Jersey and, in tough questioning, made false accusations and challenged his patriotism.
And I always thought they were the good guys. And when they came into my home and acted in the manner that they did, I felt raped.
The FBI says its dealings with Arakanolu were entirely professional, even cordial. Some, however, say law enforcement is, in essence, engaging in ethnic profiling on a massive scale.
This is un-American. All of us in this country are immigrants some way, and we should not be punished because of our roots, because of our faith.
Civil libertarians point out that some of the most embarrassing chapters in American history have come in the wake of national traumas. The internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, the McCarthy hearings during the Cold War. FBI Chief Mueller and Attorney General Ashcroft have said repeatedly that in this case there is no rush to judgment, no ethnic profiling, and no questioning of anyone without good reason.
We do not, have not, will not target people based solely on their ethnicity, period.
Others, however, including some in law enforcement, argue that a measure of profiling is appropriate here, although they prefer not to call it profiling. Their argument is that when you have 19 suspected hijackers, all of the same ethnicity, that constitutes probable cause to question members of the same ethnic group.
I think it would be naive of us not to recognize that there is certainly a clear and present danger to the absolute safety of American citizens here within the continental United States. And it is an unprecedented level of danger that exists at this juncture. And again, extraordinary circumstances are confronting us, and as a result of which extraordinary measures can be employed, save the suspension of the Constitution.
Some in law enforcement have said they wouldn't have to use such a broad brush approach if the Muslim and Arab communities were more cooperative. Some Muslims and Arabs have said they would be more cooperative if they hadn't received such rough treatment from law enforcement. The shame is that at this time when they need each other most, law enforcement needs investigative leads and Muslims need protection from hate crimes, they trust each other least.
ABC's Dan Harris. Despite all of these concerns, many Muslim and Arab Americans report that law enforcement has protected them, especially now during this difficult time. That in part 2 of Dan Harris's report later in the broadcast. But first, during an unprecedented criminal investigation, how far is too far? That conversation when we come back.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by MasterCard.
The last few weeks have certainly been a difficult time in history to be an Arab or Muslim American, but it hasn't been all bad. Once again, here's ABC's Dan Harris.
This is the type of thing that's been making headlines. An angry march on a mosque in Chicago, a car driven through the front of a mosque in Cleveland, the murder of a Pakistani Muslim in Dallas. But there's a quiet counter-trend that's not been nearly as well documented. In Chicago, Christians and Jews formed a protective prayer circle around an Islamic center. Outside Los Angeles today, neighbors stood watch as Muslim parents picked their children up from school.
I think a lot of the parents have said that they were very afraid for schools to start. They were worried that their children would be targets.
We had a lot of members in the community who were afraid. They suffered different types of intimidation, be it being yelled at, cursed at, even physically threatened.
The chair was thrown all over.
Labib Salama, an Egyptian businessman in New York City, had his cafe vandalized. When he decided not to press charges, the vandals returned to thank him. They got to know one another, then the vandals helped him clean up. In ways both large and small, Muslims and Arabs say their neighbors have come through with much-needed support in these uncertain, insecure times. Emails containing such stories have flooded into the Council on American Islamic Relations, a Muslim advocacy group in Washington, D.C. They describe neighbors bringing flowers and co-workers offering assistance. Sometimes complete strangers feel moved to signal their solidarity. A small but ardent group of women around the nation are wearing hijab, the traditional Muslim headscarves. They aim to send a message to Muslim women and society at large.
Let's not jump to conclusions about people and perpetuate hate and fear in the wake of this horrible disaster. Instead, let's do things that foster understanding and peace and faith among people.
Catholic school children in Chicago have been writing letters of support and concern to local Muslims.
I think that there's good people out there, and I think we should be nice to everybody and, try to understand them and stuff.
While these acts of kindness don't get nearly as much attention, Muslims and Arabs say even in this time of tension, they found that decency, not bigotry, is the norm. For Nightline, I'm Dan Harris in New York.
That's our report for tonight. I'm Chris Bury in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
You can order a transcript or video cassette of this or any other Nightline broadcast by dialing 1-800-CALL-ABC or visiting abcnewsstore.com on the World Wide Web.
This has been a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.